The 12.12.3 wipe is here, and while it's definitely not jam-packed full of content, there are some things that are working surprisingly well that the community have been asking for a long time. My favorite of those things is the tweaks to lighting and specifically how NVGs work and how viable they are. And since we knew this change was coming, I was able to go out before the wipe and get some B-roll with the NVGs so that we can directly compare how they used to work and how they work now. So I've got a couple of the most common NVGs on a few different maps in a few different places, and we'll be able to kind of just let these play. You can see how it used to work, how it works now. Afterwards, we'll talk about what's working really, really well, the IR lasers and flashlights, and a few things that they still need to tweak. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive right in. So obviously, as you can see, it's working really, really well. The change is awesome. The way I used to describe it is now when you look at the old way, it feels almost just like there's like a green piece of construction paper or tissue paper in front of your monitor. Everything is just kind of washed out. It's just a little green. There was a lot of noise, like actually like film grain noise introduced with a lot of these different NVGs. The way lighting worked, it all just felt so washed out and kind of weird, especially now when you actually see it, you know, the new way. A lot of places are actually still really dark. There's a lot more depth. There's a lot more detail. You can see detail at distances, right? So the way NVGs work roughly is by just intensifying any sort of light source. And so when you get into these really, really dark places when there are no light sources around, it's not just bright but green. It's actually dark. You actually still maybe can't see and need a flashlight, maybe one of the new IR flashlights or something like that. So there's a lot more depth. It looks a lot better, and it definitely makes the cheaper versions, such as the blue one or the cheap green ones, much, much more viable. These used to be incredibly noisy, incredibly hard to see, and it was really like the only way you were going to effectively play night raids, especially towards the end game, was only to get the best night vision goggles. They're really expensive, and it's another risk that you're taking, and there was just like really no reason to use the cheap ones before, especially on places where there's a lot of dark areas and light areas. Now, it seems like the cheaper ones are much more viable, which is kind of cool because now I might either go factory or go interchange or go some of these other places where I'm going to toggle them off or on. I'm definitely going to be changing some of my other equipment, bringing an IR laser or flashlight instead of just like a regular laser. So it definitely feels much more thought out, much more fleshed out, and it definitely looks better. Speaking of the IR lasers and flashlights, they look awesome and they finally work. We had IR lasers and flashlights, which you couldn't tell before because they didn't work under night vision and you couldn't see them obviously without night vision. So they were just selections on the lasers that nobody saw. Well, now, as you can see, the regular lasers are insanely solid beams of light. They're like lightsabers coming out of your gun, which is actually a really cool vibe and actually could be pretty helpful with your point fire or with aiming or something like that. But now we also have the IR lasers, which are much more subtle. They almost look like the day lasers do in the day. The IR lasers look like that at night. And if you flip up your NVGs, you cannot see those. So if you're fighting an enemy that does not have NVGs, well, now you kind of have this advantage. You can use the laser, you can use the flashlights, and they're not going to be able to see them. And like we said, similar with the flashlights, IR flashlights, you can't see them without nods on. So if somebody else, scavs, bosses, or if other PMCs are running around, they're not going to be able to see that flashlight. And the flashlights are really, really cool because like we said before, there are actually darker areas now. It's not just this big green washed out mess. There are actually darker areas if you're walking out in the woods or something like that. And these IR flashlights are pretty cool. I don't know how IR flashlights work in real life, but what it seems like is these really need something to bounce the IR light off of to work. If you're just kind of like out in an open field and you turn on the flashlight, you can almost like not be sure if the flashlight is on. But if there's any sort of metallic surface or something for that IR light to then bounce back off and illuminate, then they work really, really well. Obviously, if you're really close to something, they can work really well, but they're kind of like a small circle. Additionally, there are actually different intensities of IR lasers, just like there are different intensities of flashlights. So for instance, the D-ball, which is great because it's got regular lasers, regular flashlights, an IR flashlight, and an IR laser. The IR flashlight there works and is great, but then if you switch over to something like a PEC 15, the IR flashlight there is so much brighter. So once again, your equipment can also kind of be informed by the gear you're running and what time of day, which is really, really cool. So that's something to take note of. There's actually different brightnesses with that, but the IR lasers, the IR flashlights, they work now. They're really, really cool. Obviously be careful if the enemy you're fighting has NVGs, he's going to be able to see those things, but this is definitely going to make night combat way, way cooler. It's also actually really cool to be walking outside, maybe through the woods or like through the wooded areas of customs or something like that, where there's no light, obviously, except for the moonlight. It's really cool that the NVGs aren't doing much for you there. And that's where you might use those IR flashlights a lot more because there's not a lot of artificial light. There's not flares or lights from buildings or anything. It's just the moonlight. You're walking way out and it's really, really cool. So I can see this used a lot on woods or something like that, where the NVGs are probably going to be so much darker than they were before. So the IR flashlights are really cool. It's just cool to see that you can actually almost not even realize you're wearing night vision. Everything, of course, is going to have that green hue, but it's just not going to be this huge green washed out mess anymore. And that's really cool. Another really cool thing is this drastically improves the usability of holographic sights at night. Before, the holographic sights would actually be so bright, it would basically blind you anytime you try to ADS on an enemy. Well, now the holo sights are much, much more usable, as you can see, which is really, really cool. Another small thing to note as well is, yes, I do have post effects on, but A, they're really, really subtle, and B, as you can see, when I'm turning them off or on, it's not like the post effects is clearing up a lot of the noise or doing much of anything. At night, the post effects are actually not very noticeable. So if you have post effects on or different post effects on, I wouldn't really worry about that. It's not like they're making a big difference here. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about, which is where they definitely still need to tweak, and that is interchange. Interchange is obviously a place where the lighting has been a frustration for the community, whether it's day or night raids, and that actually still shows here. As you can see, some of the cheaper night vision on interchange are still incredibly noisy, and it almost looks like the old way. They definitely look better than they did before on interchange, but it's like a completely different game when we're talking about the quality of night vision on interchange versus other maps. Now, in this specific clip, the moonlight is really, really strong, where maybe it wasn't strong before, or on factory, it's really dark because there is no moonlight. That could be part of it, but I've tested this at multiple different times of day, at multiple different moonlight intensities, and as you can see, I can test it inside the mall in a dark area where there wouldn't be any moonlight coming in. This is just something to be done with interchange. And you can actually see, in my opinion, this almost proves that there's some just weirdness going on, like outside in the front of Idea. You've got the moonlight, then you've got a floodlight out there. So you can specifically see where the floodlight, where the artificial light is shining. And then you have just a crazy amount of moonlight. And then you kind of have the shadow of the building. And no matter where you are, the night vision, it looks noisy. It looks weird. Once again, you can go inside, find a dark place, and it's still really noisy. Now, the super expensive quad nods definitely clear it up a little bit, but this is definitely showing that there's just something kind of weird with the lighting on interchange. I've noticed that it felt better this wipe, even doing day raids. I feel like I can notice it a little bit more, but something is going wrong here. There's some sort of weirdness with the interchange lighting. So if you're going to run interchange, it's up to you. Take a look at this and pick whichever nods are right for you, or just run a flashlight. But overall, this is a huge win. The night vision looks so much better. So hopefully this properly showed off everything with the new night vision. Hopefully this kind of set proper expectations. I hope that this drives more people to play more night raids. I think that would be good for the game. And this definitely has me excited to be able to use the cheaper ones, and just that everything is better across the board. If you like this video, think about dropping a like, commenting down below, or subscribing to the channel for more content like this. We've got a ton more content coming with the new wipe and the new patch. I also stream Escape From Tarkov on Twitch about 6 days a week. That link is down below. I'd love to have you stop by and say hey. And if you're looking for people to play Tarkov with in the new patch, our Discord is an awesome place to be. We've got over 15,000 members. That link is down below as well. Thank you again for stopping by, and I will definitely see y'all on the next one.